Good morning. My name is George Lees. I'm a professor in neuroscience, and at the moment I'm trying to investigate financial crimes that are of great importance to the nation, and my informant and the expert in that sector, who I'm going to introduce you to now, is called Gordon Bowden. This is Gordon on the left of the image, and he's meeting for the first time Ed Miliband, who's the leader of the opposition here in the UK. Gordon has, I think I'll let Gordon tell you himself about his position. He's served in the forces, he's been all around the world as a serviceman, and he's now doing the most important job of anyone in this country for this country. I'll briefly let Gordon introduce himself.
Okay, my name is Gordon Bowden. I'm ex-Royal Air Force Gentech GSE engineer. I served for 12 years from 1969 to 1982. I served at military bases, both at home and overseas, Near East, Far East, and left the Royal Air Force in 1982 when I was commissioned to be a general engineer for Goldfields of South Africa, where I worked for nearly 6 years at the Challenges Prefontaine gold mine for GFSA Goldfields of South Africa as an HVAC refrigeration engineer, mine hoist engineer for the 120 person, 36 person and 18-ton rock winders engineer and mine flood control engineer. I left Goldfields of South Africa and then for 11 years was employed by the University of Transkei as a facility lecturer.
And can you tell the public how much you get for your pension?
Well, I can't get it yet because they moved the goalpost for accessing my pension until I'm 67.
So you're trying to save the UK Treasury from grand larceny, but you have no earning power?
No, unfortunately not. Ashamed to say that I'm on pension credit, which is restricted access to it.
Okay, Gordon, we're now going to bring to the attention of the public your attempts to bring war crimes and financial grand larceny to the attention of your local MP, who is Chris Williamson, in the Derby North constituency. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Chris Williamson, Derby MP North, and his cohort, Mrs. Well, I can say cohort, but conspirator, I would say, Mrs. Mark Beckett, who is footing the way joint communications of the material that I've put before them in regard to massive fraud on the alternative investment market and documents seized by the Derby police.
So these are relatively anonymous politicians. My MP was on the UK cabinet until very recently, and that's an image of him, Michael Moore, in Afghanistan, meeting British troops who are there as part of a NATO exercise. And the other image there is of Wootton Bassett, which is in the Prime Minister's constituency near Chipping Norton, where we just happen to have major interests in the war graves sector. But what we want to talk about is why both Chris Williamson and Michael Moore MP refuse to engage in our correspondence. If you look at that image there, you see Gordon's MP Chris Williamson. You see that he has 1,300 entries in Hansard, and the latest is on abuses of schoolgirls in Nigeria and some health and safety issues. None of Gordon's issues have been registered on Hansard, despite the fact that they cover the economic crash of 2008 and the brutalisation of various countries in the Middle East. My MP Michael Moore, who's been on the cabinet for all of the time since 2010 when the coalition government were put there, has nothing at all on Hansard. That is a reflection of the cover-up of government crimes on an unprecedented scale, which I'll get Gordon to describe as we pan down the pages. Those are the correspondence details for our MPs. We never get replies, we never get acknowledgement of receipt, but that's chris.williamson.mp@parliament.uk, and it's Michael Moore MP, all one word, at parliament.uk. They are in breach of the UK Constitution to cover up, and remember that Williamson is Labour and was New Labour, Michael Moore is Lib Dem, and the crimes of the Prime Minister and the constituency, the Chipping Norton set, will be profiled further down the page. So I'll let Gordon tell you about how he and a chap called Peter Eyre tried to engage Chris Williamson in the facts about the arms to Iraq scandal and the deployment of depleted uranium in NATO campaigns in various countries and continents. Over to you, Gordon. I'm now scanning at your letters, the letters that were delivered to David Cameron by Chris Williamson and Chris Williamson's response to you in Derby.
Well, thank you, John. Yes, the three letters replies from Chris Williamson were underpinned by a meeting at the council offices where both Peter and I went to speak to him in regard to political dynamic documents I recovered back in July 2010, which were a sequence of over 400 documents recovered from the website of Miss Andrea Davison, who was interlocked to massive fraud, theft and money laundering for an organised crime network, which she was raided under a proceeds of crime order on the 13th of the 1st, 2010. Some of those documents I made into a free folder of 31 pages, including political correspondence letters between Lord Douglas Hoyle and Andrea Davison, response to Lord Hoyle, and letters from Lord Hoyle to the Chief of the Derby Police. Those letters and other documents regarding items seized within the proceeds of crime raid by the Derby Police, of which Miss Andrea Davison made public and published a 4-page list of items seized under the proceeds of crime order, which I have a full copy of. It indicated that she was...
So I'm just showing images of that now, starting with Judge makes it illegal for me to. On January, I was alone in my flat and asleep when the Derby police, headed by DC Winard, raided my flat. That's one of the relevant documents?
Yeah, that's 151 DC Stephen Winard.
Okay, and I'll just scroll through the documents. There's the one, Derby police seized documents wanted by the Iraq inquiry, with a picture of Davison in the countryside.
But when she was very young, I would say in the early 20s.
And one of the headers refers to Nick Clegg in that particular disclosure.
That's correct.
Okay, and then other documents include a letter from Lord Hoyle to Mick Creedon, Chief Constable, Derbyshire Constabulary, Butterley Hall, Ripley, Derbyshire, DE5 3RS, dated the 17th of March 2010, the year that the coalition government came to power. There is no signature on the letter, and there are several bits have been deleted. I'm not sure who did the deletions.
Well, the deletion was done by Andrea Davison to try to rescue her from Bankfield, who was resident in the boiler room when the Derby police raided him. He wasn't in the picture, I'm afraid, but his name is David William Mills. He's an ex-security specialist working on fuel stations, electrical production, nuclear production,
Doug Hoyle in the second chamber, i.e. the House of Lords, was involved in this case and what he was asked to do and why he was corresponding with the Chief Constable in Derbyshire?
Well, there was a long-time liaison between Andrea Davison and the Tagalog journalist Pete Sawyer and the Labour Party. They were part of a disinformation network using a political satire magazine called Scallywag, which was meant to destabilise the Conservative government by highlighting corruption and various sexual inferences against senior politicians. And it was Scallywag was funded by a gentleman called Azil Nadir, who is currently on trial in London for assets that they call Polytech. Now, the other funder of Scallywag was a gentleman called Mohammed Al-Fayad, who was the father of Dodi. So you understand the political connections with regard to Miss Davison was and her close circle of friends. But Lord Doug Hoyle, it has been known to me, was the recipient with Derby South MP Margaret Beckett of certain documents explaining away the illegal inputting of 17.8 million into the near-empty Tory accounts to fight the 1992 general election. It's believed that Andrea Davison and others provided Lord Doug Hoyle and Margaret Beckett with the material as declared in Hansard on June 22nd, 1993, starting from column 197 as to who the sponsor was of the funding of the Conservative Party of 17.8 million. It is known to myself and others close to me that that 17.8 million was a donation by a gentleman called John Arnold Breedenkamp, a conservative covert weapon supplier who dealt with many people in the covert arms trade, including Oliver North and various South African special forces and UK SAS members who formed a private military company. So, Lord Doug Hoyle, on behalf of Andrea Davison, wrote to the Chief of the Derby Police to try to expedite her case as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll go back now to the Williamson page of my website, if you can just access that, and you can explain how vigorously you have tried to get these things into the public eye, maybe starting with your visit to the Derby Police on the 15th of February 2011. I've now got an image of that up as we make the video. So the receipt, you were given an official receipt number for that from Louise Sarah Hawkins at the Derbyshire Constabulary.
Yeah, that was a joint visit by Peter and myself to gain access to information or inquire about the freedom of information request that we would make to inform also the Derbyshire Police, that we were involved in a civil litigation case against Andrea Davis when I made public other documents relating to massive fraud, of which the Derbyshire Police refused to action. And we met with the Freedom of Information officer, who explained that our civil case should not go ahead of any criminal case put against Andrea Davis.
And you were corresponding with Chris Williamson at that time, trying to get these.
Making him know that within the documents that I presented to him in the personal visit that we had at the council houses, I gave him a folder file of 31 pages, which showed the interrelationship between a convicted, then not convicted, but facing criminal trial
time on the 22nd of March from Chris Williamson to you on what you had asked him to take to the Prime Minister? Can I read that out for the public?
Yes, of course, yes.
Dear Mr. Bowden, please find enclosed 2 letters I have sent on your behalf. These include a letter to the Prime Minister with which I enclosed your correspondence, and then a further chase-up letter when he did not respond. I don't think ongoing correspondence with you on this issue is particularly productive. As you will appreciate, I have over 700,000 other constituents.
No, it's 70,000.
Sorry, 70,000 other constituents in Derby North, and many of them contact me with pressing personal concerns. Remember that the last issue he has taken forward to Hansard is on the abuse of Nigerian children in another country under the regime of another government. I am sorry that you have not secured the outcome you desired on this issue. Yours sincerely, Chris Williamson, Labour MP for Derby North.
Yeah, my concerns with this were, one, it didn't cover the issue. All the documents that I forwarded in a file, and those documents were recorded as duplicates of others. And so Chris Williamson looked for
But there was no signature on them, and there was no indication of whether or not it had actually been sent to the Prime Minister's office.
Exactly, and I asked Chris Williamson to provide me with copies of those letters that had been forwarded to the Prime Minister.
How convenient that he's forgotten to put a signature on it.
No, he refused to forward me those correspondence,
Okay.
which is an unconstitutional, how can I put it?
It's a breach of the UK Constitution.
Yeah, just not only a breach, it's my mistrust of his involvement in forwarding these political dynamic documents, which should carry further disclosure to the general public. And this man is not fit to hold public office. I know him to be a complete and utter liar. He is a disgrace not only to the population of Derby, but to anybody within the Labour Party.
And remember, New Labour were the regime that took us into war in Iraq,
Exactly. And
with very little reference to democracy or the democratic process.
you understand that politics is a dirty game, basically, and it's all about controlling a piggy bank. Unfortunately, within the Constitution, they have because they are public servants, if there was any information within those documents, which clearly there was, with personal letters between senior members of the House of Lords and MPs, and including Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and Kenneth Clarke, that these letters represented an overview of corruption within the Labour Party, and Chris Williamson, then, for the sake of his own survival and that of the senior members of the Labour government, refused to forward the request to the Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron, who is just as corrupt as the others.
So that takes us further down the page. Can you scroll down and see? At this point, you take us to a party political congress. I believe it was in Nottingham, was it?
Yeah, that's correct. There was an invitation by certain members of the public in Derby to request tickets for this, and I saw this as an ideal opportunity to forward copies of those 31 pages to various senior members of the Labour Party. As you can see,
And I've now just scrolled down to pictures of Gordon Brown and Tony Blair grinning like Cheshire cats on that theme. So can you explain what happened at that congress and how you were responded to with your huge accusations?
well, basically I took the two cover documents of which I recovered by access to Edinburgh on the front page of those 2 pages, over 400 documents.
This is from Davidson's residence
That's correct. No,
on our website.
Their website, which is
website as a token gesture, because the website has now been long since closed down for access to the public.
But as I explained to you, there are methods to recover those pages, which if anybody wants to recover them, you can see by using Internet Archive Wayback Machine, you can still access certain pages. However, most of the material has been removed, and certain documents and files you cannot now access. However,
But you're pictured at the Labour Party conference in Nottingham, presenting all of the evidence from all of the documents that you got from the closed website. And can I just read out the statement that you make, which is coincident with that? The reason he refused to cover my issues in Parliament were because they implicated very senior Labour Party politicians. Prime Minister Tony Blair, Prime Minister Gordon Brown, MP Neil Kinnock, MP Peter Hain, Kenneth Clarke, who's the longest serving Conservative Party cabinet member, Lord Laird Artigavan, I'm not sure if he has a party affiliation, and Lord Douglas Howell, who we've already seen, Hoyle, who we've already seen some correspondence from on my webpage. Can you tell us a little bit more about those senior Labour Party politicians?
yeah, the meeting, Congress meeting of the new Labour Party, to go forward with conviction, to tell the truth, to expose the corruption in other parties, etc. However, as you can see, this meeting I presented to Baroness Scotland and various other senior members. Sorry, that's just my printer going on. To present the documents, which you can see clearly, or you can't see clearly, but you can see from the second portrait shot when I handed it to certain dignitaries, that on the far top left-hand corner of the page, it's the same photograph of the document on the 2 pages that I sent you.
Yes, and just to explain to the public, we've already posted this stuff on the deceit and cover-up involving my MP Michael Moore and Gordon's MP Chris Williamson. The sub-page beyond that on my website will be high-resolution images of those documents, or the evidence from Tara Davidson's website that has subsequently been obfuscated or is no longer available for public scrutiny and has been rejected as irrelevant by the politicians who committed the war crimes and the financial grand larceny. So Gordon, we've got further down the page references to Baroness Scotland and to even the British press accusing Lord Doug Hoyle and Baroness Scotland of being profiteers in the kickbacks to politicians at Westminster sector. But keep profiling the roles in these major war crimes. So we've got Ed Miliband pictured with his brother further down the page.
Yeah, that's correct. On exiting that conference, as we were walking back to the bus park, I came across Ed Miliband as he was walking with the secretary, reporters, etc. And he just happened to stop and shake my hand. At the same time, I passed a file of the same documents to his cohorts that were with him.
So his administration received all of those 40-page some of the headers from the documents that were seized.
Yes.
My early history in exposing arms to Iraq. This is from Miss Davidson. Trade and Industry Select Committee into Arms to Iraq and the Scott Inquiry. And I'll just add that the Scott Inquiry was conducted under University of Warwick rules. Would you like to explain that to the public, Gordon?
Yeah, Warwick rules are those, there are injunctions made upon those giving evidence in a secrecy clause. That's what Warwick rules, Warwick
So
rules
basically
are.
they are given a script that they have to voice over during the inquest.
What normally happens under Warwick rules is that the inquiry is overviewed and the release of the report is already pre-written, if you understand.
Yeah. So it's like making a movie. You pick
Yes.
you pick the people who chair the inquest, who just happen to be directors of the same companies with foreign secretaries in 2002. We covered that in one of our earlier videos. That's Chilcot, the Arms to Iraq chair, who was a director with Malcolm Rifkind at Abraxa and dozens of other companies.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, and so that is the secrets that allowed our politicians and G8 politicians globally to crash the banks in 2008. So this is not just about war crimes and the cover-up of war crimes. It's about global economic fraud by parliament buildings and their second chambers.
Unfortunately for the general public, when you're looking at the Chilcot Inquiry, it's stalled because I have correspondence with the Chilcot Inquiry Secretary, which clearly states in their referral to me that they had no contact with Andrea Davison. However, I have a Derbyshire Police report into the trial of Andrea Davison when she was convicted on the 25th of the 7th, 2012, where it clearly says that police investigated that documents showed that she did have contact with the Chilcot Inquiry. So, the one contradicts the other. Are we to believe the Derbyshire Police or the Chilcot Inquiry? And this is where I've attempted to gain clarity by objective communications with Chris Williams, MP, Right Honourable.
And can you profile the role of the lesser politicians like Kinnock and Hayne? Ken Clarke is quite notorious for his outspoken right-wing views on sexuality and rape within the UK cabinet, even within the current regime. And in the context of what's happening to children in Nigeria, can you tell us how Kinnock and Hayne and Lord Artigovan and Lord Doug Howell have been involved in these? Hoyle, sorry. Yeah.
Andrea Davison operated a boiler room in North Wales. She also operated a boiler room in London, in Vancouver, Canada, in Cyprus, Gibraltar, Rhode Island, and many other locations, and was part of a massive network that made false and fake passports, ID documents, fake share certificates. And what the Derbyshire Police uncovered was a treasure trove that went far beyond their capability and financial resources to investigate the major people above and beyond Andrea Davison. And this is where I get very angry with those people that allow the senior members of these fraud groups to get away with it. So, Lord Doug Hoyle and Peter Hayne fell into a close relationship with Andrea Davison, the convicted fraudster and forger, when she went to his constituency office in the past, in about 2010, I think it was. No, it must have been before that. Where she was with Pete Sawyer, the investigative journalist, he refused because he refused to answer my emails. And that's because he is also a co-director in a Ponzi scam company called Amara Mining, which is a throwback from the morphed Clough mining companies with Algie Clough, of which you know about.
And Lord Doug Hoyle has been accused of whoring himself to arms dealers, even by the British Free Press on the front page of The Guardian, I'm led to believe.
Yeah, that's correct. But the other people, Neil Kinnock, Ria Davison was recommended by senior Labour Party members to go and see Neil Kinnock. And so this lady is well known to the senior politicians, including the letters which I recovered of correspondence between her and Tony Blair and Gordon Brown.
So we're back to the Labour Party.
Yes.
I've got images on that page about Williamson being a liar, featuring Baroness Scotland and her capacity to make £7,500 a day to advise leaders of military coups in the Maldives. Presumably, if they've publicised that, it's relatively small beer in her criminal transcript. And the day that I published the page of the guillotine and accused Stephen Hester of the murder of a whistleblower within the RBS structure when he was with the Abbey National and Richard Chang was killed,
Yes.
Ed Miliband's brother flew the country on the same day as an MP for Labour in Newcastle, which is a very poor sector of the northeast of England. But can you tell me a little bit more about the left-wing connections?
Well, if you just go down to that same scroll down to the one with Baroness Scotland,
Yeah.
You'll see the one with Margaret Beckett and Chris Williamson opposite each other, where Peter A put a caption, speech caption into it.
Would you like to read that out for the public?
Yeah, well, naturally I knew about the money mentioned in Hansard. Gordon Bowden and Peter A came to see me, but not tactfully I pushed them on to Chris Williamson. And that's legitimately so, because I was a constituent of Chris Williamson. However,
Like I am a constituent of Michael Moore, but we cannot correspond with them.
yeah, but Margaret Beckett still had a duty of care to disclose in Parliament those documents, because she was fully aware of the 17.8 million which was laundered and conduited into the empty Tory accounts, because she was the person at the Department of Trade and Industry who interviewed the directors of Astra Holdings.
And that was the delegation to South Africa that involved David Kelly, the late David Kelly.
No, say that what she was made known and privy to was that in 1989, a young Conservative, David Cameron, was put in a jolly, a paid free visit.
Yeah, free holiday to Pelindaba.
That's correct.
Yeah, and we've published the correspondence on that in the past.
Yeah, with
from the Conservative Policy Research Unit.
Yeah, it was said to have been paid for by a front company with links to Armscor, which was registered in London, but it was a front of Armscor, and the people said to have visited with David Cameron were the aeronautics engineer Sir Ken Warren, and the other person that went was said to have been Dr. David Kelly, who was found after suiciding himself on a hillside. But it is believed that the knowledge of the visit to Pelindaba, which is just north of Pretoria in South Africa, was in order for a big covert WMD arms recovery of 9 in-stock, ex-stock 20 kiloton batteries
Conservative Policy Unit was one Doug Hoyle.
That's correct.
Yep. At that point on the war crimes and the trading, can you just remind me of the party affiliation of the late Robin Cook?
Well, all I understand is that he had full access to these documents and would have known.
And he was the only new Labour member who had the bottle to stand up and say, I do not want to go to war in Iraq.
Oh yes, yeah.
Can you remind me where Robin Cook is now?
Well, unfortunately, he's pushing up the dip.
Yeah, he's in a cemetery.
Yeah, well, like Dr. David Kelly.
And Dr. David Kelly's only motive for telling the truth was so that he could have a decent pension like the rest of the UK civil servants.
Correct.
Yeah. Which brings me down to the images of senior Conservatives. We've done New Labour to death, and various people who were in the New Labour cabinet who have been found in graveyards since, which takes us to senior Conservatives like Jonathan Aitken,
Yes.
Mark Thatcher, BAE Systems, all linked to criminal covert arms trade to Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia. And you're having trouble getting this into the attention zone of elected MPs in rural Derbyshire.
Unfortunately for the general public, they have little understanding of how covert arms trading is conducted. People like Jonathan Aitken and Mark Thatcher were co-directors in a company called BMARC, a Belgian arms production company.
And I spelt that wrongly. It's B-M-A-R-C.
Yes, BMARC.
Okay.
And that company designed the new version of a Gatling gun that used vast amount of ammunition fired at incoming low height missiles that's fired against maritime shipping. That company was subsequently acquired by Astra Holdings, and the involvement of Jonathan Aitken and Mark Thatcher was obscured in that transaction because the person in charge of, or then had taken charge of Astra Holdings, was a covert MI6 plant called Adolphus Cock.
And this is exactly coincident with the time that Mrs. Thatcher signed a gagging order and very quickly got herself out of British politics.
No, she was removed as a tactical diversion because I think that she knew that the game was up with regard to covering up for BAE Systems, where the Al Yamama deal went ahead, where Mark Thatcher made a bundle of Wonka in the deal with Hawks to the Saudi Air Force.
Are you still scanning down my webpage for the liar Derby North? We've now got to the stage where the policing of our country is in the hands of elected commissioners, and the next image tells us about the head of the Derby Council, who is one Ranjit Banwait, and the elected member of the Derby Police Crime Commissioning Unit, who is also a left-winger in inverted commas. His name is Alan Charles.
Yeah, I've got that scan. Ranjit Banwait, major turnover of the Labour Council. They got rid of one of the then head chair of the City Council, Mr. Ranjit Banwait, who is Chris Williamson's sidekick and Margaret Beckett's sidekick, was inducted as the new leader. There's a lot to be said about corruption in politics, but this one, I think, should be investigated by an outside party, given the fact that they refused to discuss those documents, and Ranjit Banwait was given copies of same, so he's fully aware.
And the creation of organisations like G4S, which are progressively displacing ordinary British cops from ordinary British pavements. Can you explain some of the directorships at G4S and how people like Lord Condon are in charge of that?
Well, you mentioned two of them, didn't you?
Rifkin?
Rifkin, all interlopes with a select syndicate of people with very high-profile positions in government.
And Lord Condon was the chair of the Princess Diana fatal accident inquiry and found it to be an accident.
Yes, they
in France they found it to be an unlawful killing. But G4S now, as a private initiative, is displacing British police people from their jobs. You've talked yesterday about how G4S now collect the revenues for the parking system within the UK as the parkies lose their jobs as private individuals who are not military or police citizens within the police force. They occupy the same buildings, but their jobs are tumbling en masse now in favour of a privately owned company that is run by former heads of the police service in metropolitan London, a whole string of them, and by Malcolm Rifkin, who is a strong campaigner for the Better Off Together campaign, even although he has a strong Scottish accent and he lives in leafy Kensington. They're all on the board, they're all on the take, and they look ever so innocent when they publish their mugshots on Hansard.
Well, they're all, I think, because they're getting the cuts.
So that brings us to the bottom of that web page, but then there's the brief mention of paedophilic rings and the closure of the AFBio website so that these scandals on war crimes and the economic crash of 2008 can be covered up both by our government and by our monarchies.
Well, if you follow your web page down, you will see the photograph of Andrea Davison with George Less, Stephen Less, who runs the Secrets nightclubs in London, the nude lap dancing clubs, and he was a very close friend of Max Clifford. So when Andrea Davison fled pre-criminal trial, she met up with Steve Less in Miami, where the photograph was taken, which I've sent to the Derbyshire police in an effort to get them to use the Foreign Office to recover this woman from Venezuela, where she's still working for the criminal organization, doing exactly the same job that she was doing here. But when you're talking about political corruption, I'm sure that they would want this woman to remain in obscurity so that these people who you see in the segment cuts of people like Jimmy Savile, Tony Blair, and Lord Hardy, and Gordon Brown, Michael Portello, so that they can all breathe easy, much the same as they did with Azil Nadir in Polytech. But I will use...
Mandelson is not photographed. I don't know whether that means he's not a paedophile.
No, well, I'm not saying that. It said this.
But the New Labour and the Conservatives overlap in every sector that your MP in Derby has chosen not to be an important sector, which is the brutalisation of innocent countries by NATO. We've got Lord Robertson pictured at the top of that page. He's the man who gave the gun licence to Hamilton in the Dunblane massacre, and you can see Lord Hardy and all the inquest chairs who cover up the evidence from that. You can see that Sir Jimmy Savile, who was appointed a Knight of Malta by the British royal family, is laughing his face off with Prince Charles, who's the advisor to the criminal that we talked about at Lonro yesterday.
Yeah, well, much the same is that when you look at those, scroll down on your website, when you come to companies like Malaria No
with 140 or so registered companies in the business directory.
Not anymore, she hasn't. Most of them are resigned.
No, she's bailed out for shame because people like you are on the job now, who do not get a salary or a pension from people like these. Tell us the story that you told me yesterday about being a non-executive director in either chamber in the Parliament building. If you earn a salary, let's say something like £700,000, tell me that story again.
Well, a lot of the directors of virtual oil, gas and mining companies are basically inducted to give the company a semblance of authenticity and respectability. However, when you research these companies in depth, as I have done with my mining experience, by recovering the documents that they have to file to register on the alternative investment market, that when you recover the sometimes up to 500 pages of an AIM 26 admission to trade document, you notice that the directors, when they list their past and current directorships, you see that they have been directors of up to 100 fake virtual oil, gas and mining companies that have never produced 1 ounce of anything or a thimbleful of oil, and yet these people are to re-register multiple other companies to trade and to have the ability to raise money, which is from private investors, banks and financial institutes, that then go on over a period of 7 or 10 years to asset strip the companies and banks by selling them worthless shares in virtual companies, which are director-only cash shells.
So can I just profile briefly, because we need to get to the top of the food chain and understand how this thing is run. Can I remind the people that Rupert Murdoch picks British MPs on a regular basis, and that his daughter Elizabeth Murdoch is married to a Freud, and they are members of the Prime Minister Cameron's drinking club in Chipping Norton. Former members include Ronnie Barker, and the current members include Dunstan, who's head of Carphone Warehouse, Oppenheimers, Rebecca Brooks. Remember that David Cameron chose the chap who was the expert phone hacker, Andy Coulson. He is not in the Chipping Norton set to my knowledge, but they are all in the cabal that steals from the people. And we know the links to the Future of Russia Foundation, which include directors like Henry Kissinger, members of the Rothschild family, and we know how global governance is conducted, led by national traitors like Rupert Murdoch, who was given his citizenship in the USA by the CIA and by corrupted banks like the Nugan Hand Bank and corrupted presidents like Gough Whitlam.
Well, as I told you, if you look at Elizabeth Murdoch, there came my research where Elizabeth Murdoch, Rebecca Brooks and Kevin Cahill were directors of Malaria No More. Now, considering Malaria No More, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, was filmed in Australia, which was probably fronted by Rupert Murdoch himself. I saw it as a conflict of interest that a company that was getting 15p of every phone call within that program somehow silted its way back to Elizabeth Murdoch, Rebecca Brooks and Kevin Cahill. Now, as I informed you...
And can we remind the public that Rebecca Brooks is also interlocked with General Sir Mike Jackson, who brutalised the Balkans on behalf of NATO?
Well, what did I tell you earlier on about that missing warhead that was said to be transited through the Balkans?
Yeah, they're all in the same team.
Well,
General Sir Charles Guthrie,
yes.
Another head of NATO's armies, who's on the board of NM Rothschild Bank, who's stealing from British citizens like it is incredible what they are doing to their own country. and
Well,
they're
as I told you, that with the directorships with Kevin Kyle, because of my correspondence with Kevin James Kyle, where I highlighted this, that he was the only defence witness for Andrea Davison at her in absence criminal trial, where Kevin James Cahill was the advisor to Paddy Ashton, Gordon Brown and Lord Laird Artigovan. And I pointed out to Mr. Cahill that he himself and Lord Artigovan both had companies that were directly associated to the boiler rooms that were administered, or companies that were administered by Andrea Davison had their origins from. And that was 788 and 790 Finchley Road, which overviews over 500,000 shell companies.
And each time there's a shell company, there's maybe 25 or a dozen to 25 directors who take a £70,000 salary for being the boss at a scam. That's where our country is.
But nobody in the general public would have done the research that I've done that clearly shows that 788 and 790 Finchley Road is interlinked with about 25 to 30 other Finchley Road addresses, and 788 and 790 Finchley Road is directly associated to Mohammed Adnan Khashoggi, who ran major boiler rooms linked to the covert arms trade for the Iran-Contra deal. And so the police, although they've been informed that this address is linked to two British companies that asset stripped the American defense budget of over $1 billion in phantom fuel deliveries to an Afghan NATO airbase called the Manas airbase. And I think you might find reference when I made that research published via Peter Gray's website.
Can I just reiterate that Gordon does this for free as a national citizen who has a sense of respect for his own country? Would you, if you were offered it, Gordon, accept a knighthood from these people?
Only if it came with a free fishing rights to your river.
I don't think you'll be able to leverage that until they are convicted and banged up. But we're getting closer and closer to that. So the next thing that we want to talk about is this.
Can I just add to that thing with the American defense budget? Apparently, it is written that address, 788 790 Finchley Road, is under investigation by the US Senate, and those British companies that are fronted by, unfortunately, a section of the Jewish community in Finch, that same address, 788 790 Finchley Road, was used by the Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi and the mafia for money laundering purposes, and those companies were set up by David Mackenzie Donald Mills, who is the husband of Labour MP Tessa Jowl. And I wrote to Tessa Jowl asking her for an explanation into her husband's involvement with that address, 788 790 Finchley Road.
I do not believe the American inquest will deliver justice for us on the basis that when Berlusconi was in power, the last G8 summit that they held was in Genoa, which is where the man that discovered America allegedly sailed from. That was the year before they brought down the Twin Towers so that they could sweep into Iraq and Afghanistan. They're all in the same team. Only the people learning what they do to the people will change it when we refuse to comply. But we've gone over our 15-minute time limit.
Oh, a lot.
But I'll get that online, and then I'll give you a chance to talk about the massive scams on the stock market in Toronto, in Germany.
Just as a entry for this same recording, I would like to point out, as you scroll down, a photograph of a young gentleman, Richard Chang, who I have tried to help his sister, Jacqueline Chang, with forensic documents that clearly show that Kroll security were actually stationed at the same building, Abbey National Building, when he managed to do a double somersault half pike onto the ground, where he was clearly dead before he was thrown, because there was no blood on the scene.
Okay, and the coroner was Freddie Patel.
Freddie Patel, yeah.
He's been struck off from his profession for frauds that include the killing of an innocent bystander who was drunk at one of the UN protests in London.
And this is where my reference to Jacqueline Chang came, when I tried to give assistance of understanding the parameters of corporate directors of Kroll, that those two members that I've mentioned earlier, who were in Arlington Associates Limited, and that's Aldwyn James Glendining Wright, and Mark Blackburn, who worked with Ambassador Francis D. Cook, and Jeffrey White, and David Anthony Lenegas, all directors of the latter being directors of Lonro, which operated out of 22 Arlington Street, attached to the Ritz.
And the CEO of the Abbey National at that time is the guy with the grin on his face that I'm now pointing at. He got bonuses of 963,000 as a top-up to his basic salary. That's Stephen Hester, the man that fled the same week as Miliband's brother from this country.
Yeah, so why aren't the Financial Services Authority and the Serious Fraud Office looking deeper than the facade of a front and understanding how come people that asset strip a bank of hundreds of billions of pounds are then given exceptional bonuses? I mean, I'm willing to help them. It's unfortunate that the police don't use this evidence, which is forensic evidence, because it shows possibly how Richard Chang uncovered the corporates that were being allowed to use the bank as a debt facility for virtual companies. And then, unfortunately, you probably found out a little of what I know.
So that's another good man who gets it in the head, who's rigor mortised by the time he hits the deck, and his sister is a pharmacist like me, and I know that she's dedicating her entire life to clearing his name.
Yes, I've met her a few times. A lovely lady, and very determined, like myself, to get the truth out to the general public by hook or by crook, and to ensure that the general public have a far better understanding of who in politics is really ripping this country to pieces.
Thank you for your time, Gordon. We'll get together again later in the week and talk about the banking crash in 2008 and Professor Ewan Brown and many others like him in the academic sectors and in the political sectors who are stealing from our citizens and our students. And you can get a vent on the AIM systems in London, in Toronto, in Germany, in Australia that are ripping punters off, they're ripping investors off, they're ripping directors off, and they're ripping savers and pensioners off, because they just are involved in cheap shot scams. There is no integrity anywhere in the system, which is why they're picked as politicians. So we better close that there, otherwise we're going over our time limit again. But thank you for your time, and hopefully justice will be done really soon.
Right here, George. Tight lines, eh?
Bye bye.